Welcome to the third CSPT Wellbeing Livecast, and today's session is going to be taken by Tom Christodoulides. Tom is going to talk to us about how to sleep well and carry on. So, you might have heard me say a moment ago, you can use your chat functions to ask questions. There are certain points in the presentation Tom will ask you to use your chat function. He will manage that. Unfortunately, due to gremlins, I'm not able to see the chat just yet or now. So please type your questions to Tom and he will review some of those and hopefully pick them up as the presentation goes on. So by way of introduction, Tom moved up to the Northeast about 20 years ago to a post at the Adolescent Forensic Service. He then qualified as a forensic psychologist. He completed his doctorate in clinical psychology some 15 years ago. He has worked for about 8 years. He then worked for about 8 years in the South of Tyne Early Intervention Psychosis Services. And during that time, he completed his diploma in CBT. For the last 7 years, he has worked for the community treatment team in Sunderland and South Tyneside as professional head for psychological services within the psychosis pathway. So he has an interest in sleep and sleep problems for many years and completed a pilot study of CBT for insomnia in secondary care in 2018. This demonstrated the benefits to service users of being offered an evidence-based intervention for sleep. It was shown to be more helpful than the standard practice of sleep hygiene. So thank you for agreeing to deliver this webcast, Tom. I'll now hand you over.
Okay.
So could you present your screen, Tom?
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. Hold on. Okay. Is that coming through okay, Kevin?
Yep, I can see it. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on sleep. This is what we're going to cover. So there are lots of sleep problems that people present with, like sleep apnea, for example, but for today, we're going to focus on insomnia. That's difficulty going to sleep, difficulties maintaining sleep, and waking early. And then later on, we'll have a think about why our sleep is vulnerable in relation to the current situation. But let's get started by setting a context for sleep in our modern world. So here's a graph of sleep surveys taken over the past 70 years or so, and we can see that our self-reported sleep has dropped dramatically from around 8.5 hours in the 50s to around 6.5 to 7 hours in the 21st century. So in terms of human evolution, it's a substantial drop in just a relatively short space of time. So why might this be? Okay, so here's the first chance to use your chat. Just hover your mouse over the screen and the Teams option bar should pop up, and then just click on the speech bubble icon to show conversation. If you can't get this to work, don't worry. But if you can, type one reason why you think we might be sleeping so much less these days, and I'll read out as many responses as I can within the next minute. Street lights, noise, expectations have increased, uncertainty, artificial lighting, screens, brain too active, longer TV transmission times, mobile phones, technology, blue light, iPad screens, working practices, different lifestyles, working too hard, stress. This is quite stressful. Increasing drink, less physically active. Any more? Alcohol, work stress, more to fit in, expectations of lifestyle, children, less relaxing time. Okay, that's great. Thank you, everybody. So let's look at some of these in turn. So number one, the expansion of artificial light. So for hundreds of thousands of years, our sleep cycle has been governed by the sun, setting and rising. but not anymore. Now it's light that sends signals to our brains telling us that it's still daytime, delaying sleep onset. Number 2, temperature. So we know that we evolved to sleep when it's dark, but that darkness was always accompanied by a drop in air temperature. Consequently, we are evolutionary primed to sleep at lower temperatures. But the advance of central heating over recent decades has interfered with that process. Again, this is impacting our sleep. Number 3, technology, like a lot of you mentioned. Of course, we now live in a technologically advanced age, and intuitively, we all know that this is disrupting our sleep. Our access to technology 24/7 means access to stimulation and information that interferes with our sleep. Delay our bedtimes to watch another episode of Killing Eve. And worst of all, this technology has insidiously crept into our bedrooms, making this sleep zone anything but. Now let's add in our modern Western lifestyles as we juggle impossible competing demands whilst bombarded by the media with an illusion of having everything, all leading to high levels of stress, another killer for sleep. But that's okay because we have alcohol, which does help us nod off, of course, but it interrupts quality of sleep and leads to early morning waking, so we don't feel rested the next day. But that's okay because we have our alarm clocks. They wake us up anyway, except now we're curtailing sleep at both ends. But that's okay because we have coffee. Except, of course, coffee has a half-life of 6 hours and delays sleep onset. So there you go. Given all these factors we're juggling in our environment around us, it's really no surprise that we're sleeping less these days. One thing that's important with sleep is to recognise that these are just generalities and they don't affect us all the same. And we all have our own individual factors that impact on our sleep. So here's one of my very own sleep demons, my 5 a.m. cat, Bobby. But at this point, you might be thinking, so what? With all this sleep deprivation, we all seem to be getting by and getting on with our lives day to day. And all of that is absolutely true, and we are incredibly resilient. But I'd recommend reading Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, or watching his TED Talk, Sleep is Your Superpower. In this, he comprehensively presents the latest research on the function of sleep. 20 or 30 years ago, we really had very little idea why we slept, but now we know how sleep disturbance is a major contributing factor with almost all mental health disorders, how you need sleep before and after learning in order to absorb new memories, how sleep reduces the likelihood of developing all sorts of physical diseases from Alzheimer's, heart disease and cancer, which has led the World Health Organization to class nighttime shift work as a probable carcinogen. And in fact, short sleep has been found to be predictive of all-cause mortality. Okay, so far we've looked at some of the reasons why we're sleeping less and also looked at why that's important. At this point, let's introduce this chap. So this is Professor Arthur Spielman, who was based at the City University of New York. He co-founded one of the first clinical sleep disorder centers in America, and he's written more than 50 books, chapters, articles on sleep. Now, he fundamentally changed the way we think about insomnia. So let's have a look at his model and let's apply it to our current situation. So this is Spielman's 3Ps model. The horizontal line represents the threshold for insomnia, i.e. over the line equals insomnia. And here we see Spielman's first P, which is for predisposing factors. In other words, we all have a predisposition to fall asleep and stay asleep. And we know ourselves that some of us are light sleepers and some of us are deep sleepers. So we all bring our own predisposition into the current situation, making us more or less vulnerable to experience some sleep disturbance during the lockdown. One of the really important aspects of the model is that acute insomnia is extremely common, and most of us will experience bouts of this in our lives, normally as a result of Spielman's second P, a precipitating factor or trigger or stressor. Of course, at present, we've many stressors that we're having to deal with. All the threat and uncertainty of the pandemic, concern for both ourselves and for our friends and family, having to remain indoors, social distancing, some of us having too much time on our hands, rest of us having an increase and a change in our roles and responsibilities. So under these circumstances, some sleep disturbance is to be expected, and that's exactly what's been reported in the media. So we know that periods of sleep disturbance in response to stressors like this are common and to be expected. But this can be when the third P starts to creep in, the perpetuating factors. So at the moment, examples might be drinking more alcohol to relax of an evening and to help us fall asleep, then drinking more coffee to feel more alert during the day, constantly checking our phones for COVID-19 updates, or not keeping to our usual sleep routines in response to the upheaval to our daytime routines. And again, such responses are really common and will usually resolve naturally over time as we learn to adapt to our new way of life. But if enough of these perpetuating factors continue, this is when problematic sleep habits can develop. And then we might find that we still can't sleep, even once the pandemic has passed and we're back to normal. Okay, so what can we do about it? Let's come back to Arthur Spielman. So he took a new approach to insomnia, not to treat it as an unfortunate side effect of other mental health disorders, but to treat it as a disorder in its own right. He helped people change their relationship with sleep by guiding them through healthy sleep behaviors, what we now know as CBT for insomnia or CBTI. Okay, over to you again. So use the chat function again if you're able to name a sleep behavior or habit that helps promote. And again, I'll read as many as I can out within the next minute. Meditation, relaxation, dark environment, reading, exercise, relaxation, walking, lack of stimulation, no screens, reading, turn off screens, not napping, get up and get out of bed to do something else, warm drink, no caffeine, exposure to daylight, yoga, no problems to solve, routine, no technology in the bedroom, laughter, notice your breathing, reducing caffeine, turn off the lights, no work in the bedroom, reading. These are all fantastic. Any more? Comfortable bed, build up your sleep bank, don't eat too late, no animals. I can agree with that one. Don't try to go to sleep, meditation. Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Let's have a look at some of them. Okay, so number one, sleep hygiene. So something most of us have heard of is sleep hygiene. It's the name for a bunch of behaviors that generally promote sleep. Much of it is common sense, and yet at the same time, most of us could still improve in an area or two. Sleep hygiene by itself actually has a weak evidence base for treating insomnia, but it is good as a preventative measure, and it's hard to make other changes if these things aren't in place. In other words, it's necessary, but often not sufficient. Here's some examples. I think you've listed most of these. Make your bedroom a technology-free zone. Make sure you're eating a healthy diet with regular meal times. Limit alcohol and caffeine. Make your room as dark as possible with blackout blinds or an eye mask. Ideal temperature is 18 degrees Celsius for sleep. So these rules don't guarantee a better night's sleep, but they stack the odds in your favor. Number two, exercise. So in contrast to sleep hygiene, exercise by itself has an emerging evidence base for treating insomnia. The good rule of thumb is doing this daily, at least 20 minutes, ideally at high intensity, and any time except within a few hours of bedtime. And if you're not sure where to start, lots of programs and exercise tips have appeared online since the lockdown, such as PE with Joe on YouTube. Number three, sun exposure. Although we can't meet in big groups since the outbreak, we can still go outdoors at times, and daily sun exposure for about 30 to 45 minutes, especially in the morning, promotes wakefulness during the day and sleepiness at night. Number four, a regular sleep routine. So for many of us, our daily routine has become unsettled, and this has had a knock-on effect on our sleep. And we know that a regular routine for going to bed and getting up at the same time every day helps sleep. Much of sleep is about conditioning. Over time, a sleep routine automatically sends signals to your brain and body to make you sleepy as you approach your usual bedtime, and helps you wake as you approach your usual getting up time. Number five, manage your worries. So most of us have noticed an increase in worry since the lockdown, and Kevin's already covered this in the first webinar. So some things that we can do to help manage this at bedtime are having a COVID-19 cutoff time of an hour before bed. So make this hour a coronavirus-free zone. No watching TV about it, no checking your phone for news updates, no discussing it. Another helpful technique is writing down your worries in a notebook. Just the act of writing worries down can feel like a relief and stop you ruminating. Distraction techniques work, but you've got to make them difficult, like counting back from 1,000 in sevens. Counting sheep doesn't work because it doesn't require your full concentration, which allows worry to creep in. And of course, use regular relaxation exercises. They can help: progressive muscular relaxation, deep breathing, or imagery. Number 6, the 15-minute rule. So at the moment, it's easy to lie in bed awake worrying with all that's going on, but try not to stay in bed awake for longer than 15 minutes. All this will do is link your bed with stress and worry, creating an unhealthy association. Instead, get out of bed and do something else, like read or watch a movie until you feel sleepy again. And by sleep, we mean so sleepy that your head is nodding. Number 7, someone mentioned this in the list, don't try to sleep. Good sleepers often don't know how they sleep so well, and one reason for this is that they usually put no effort or thought into getting a good night's sleep. Conversely, trying really hard to sleep can actually stop you sleeping. This is known as paradoxical intention. It's just like the pink elephant thought suppression exercise. But there is a way to turn this on its head. Rather than trying to sleep, try the opposite. Try to keep your eyes open as long as you can when you go to bed. When you feel your eyelids getting heavy, try keeping them open for a little bit longer. Doing this can counteract you trying to sleep. Ironically, this can then help you sleep. Number 8, work out your sleep size. So here's a graph of the average amount of sleep in the general population. To get the mean, just look at the variance, i.e. how much the graph is spread out. We don't all need the same amount of sleep. Trying to fit your personal amount of sleep into the general mean is like fitting your feet into the general mean of shoe size. Imagine trying to fit your feet into shoe sizes too small or too big. And yet many of us are trying to do this with our sleep. Instead, work out your sleep size that works for you. So most of us have an intuitive sense of what this looks like for ourselves, i.e. what is enough sleep to feel refreshed the next day without hours of lying awake throughout the night. And if you're not sure what your sleep size is, or if you find yourself lying awake in bed for hours at night, you could try compressing your sleep window. That's the total time that you spend in bed. The idea is to increase something called your sleep efficiency. This does not necessarily mean getting more sleep, but it's about maximizing the percentage of time that you're asleep whilst in bed. A high percentage or good sleep efficiency is indicative of your sleep size. How to do it? You pick and stick to a morning get out of bed time, then you delay your bedtime to squeeze your sleep window. How much later depends on how strict you want to be. A gentle approach would be just trying half an hour later. Or you could work out how long you are sleeping on average and then add an hour, then make that your total time in bed. In formal CBTI, a trained therapist works out your sleep efficiency and prescribes you a total time in bed each week. The metaphor is that we are taking sleep that is fragmented, of poor quality, thin and weak like stretched dough, and compressing it into one strong lump. Not necessarily more sleep, but less fragmented and of better quality. Okay, so what have we covered today? How are we sleeping these days? In a word, less. Why? A whole host of reasons, mostly related to our modern Western lifestyles. How poor sleep affects us? Matthew Walker put the fear of God into us all. But thankfully, Arthur Spielman reassured us that brief bouts of insomnia are very common, especially in response to stresses like COVID-19 and the lockdown, and they naturally resolve on their own. But if you are struggling with your sleep, we've looked at a whole host of good sleep tips to help you. Finally, some notes on where to get more help and information from CNTW, our regional sleep service, and from self-help material. But don't worry about noting it down. The slide set will be sent to everybody. And that's it. Happy dreams, everybody.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed that. So I guess now is an opportunity to use your chat function again to ask questions of Tom. And my chat function has miraculously appeared on my screen, so I might be able to help you with this bit, Tom.
Great.
So if you wouldn't mind beginning to if you've got questions, just type them in the message area. You've been using it already. and then Tom will take them. Can you see any coming through, Tom?
No.
No. Okay, so there's one from Stuart Mitchell, and Stuart is asking, how would you manage nightmares from PTSD?
Yeah, it's a good question, Stuart, and we haven't covered everything. Basically, it's nightmare rescripting in some ways is the default for nightmares, and there's different methodology of it, but generally speaking, it's exposure to the nightmare during the day to try and reduce the amount of arousal that you have in terms of that image, so that doesn't produce that amount of arousal at night. And then, of course, there's all sorts of ways in which you can rescript it. And EMDR is another thing that people do to manage nightmares. The other thing to say is that with all the other sleep problems that people have beyond just insomnia, often they still have some of those issues that we've described today in the talk. So you still want to manage those too. So for example, if someone's having nightmares with PTSD, you do nightmare rescripting, but also you don't want them lying in bed for 14 hours with fragmented sleep. You still want to work on that stuff too.
Grand. Thanks, Tom. Any other questions from the audience?
I think it's because it was such a comprehensive, excellent presentation, Kevin.
Just there's a question from Amy, and she's asking, can the sleep size fluctuate? So I'm assuming that's the compressed sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. So that I suppose a bit like your shoe size varies over your lifetime, absolutely your sleep size does too. So the times that you want to sleep and are more effective at sleeping vary throughout your lifetime. So many of us know that adolescents generally are more night owls than larks. You know, their general preference is to go to bed later and to wake later. And generally, the younger people are, the more sleep they tend to need. And so, yes, it absolutely varies. So again, it's worth thinking as you go through your life that you don't necessarily need the same sleep window that you did 20 years ago, for example. And again, the best way of working it out is have an intuitive sense of it, but also you compress it and expand it. And then you see when your sleep starts to become fragmented. So the best way of doing it is to experiment with it. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that on your own, then find a clinician who can guide you through it.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Next question's from Gail McGregor. Hi, Gail.
Hello, Gail.
There are a number of online apps, sleep aids, etc. Are there any that you would recommend?
Yeah, probably, yes. Good question. I think probably the best app out there is Sleepio. Actually, Kevin recommended that, and it's very thorough in terms of helping you examine your own sleep and quite bespoke to your own sleep. So that's a very helpful app. That's probably the one I'd direct people to first. I suppose the other thing to say is I've put in the notes at the end of the presentation. If I was going to recommend one self-help book, it would be Colin Espie's Introduction to Coping with Insomnia, which is like £5 on Amazon, and it covers everything I've covered today. It's incredibly accessible, and it guides you through how to work through this stuff on your own. So if there was one place to go, that's the app and that's the book that I'd recommend.
And Tom, Gabrielle is asking, are there any specific models for sleep to formulate with patients?
Well, lots of different sleep clinicians have come up with different models. So I was taught by Professor Jason Ellis from Northumbria University, and he outlined a number of different models. I think the Spielman one that I've outlined today is probably the most accessible one for patients because it's very easy to understand. And then really it's just working out what are the bespoke precipitating and perpetuating factors for that individual, because it's different for everybody. And so, you know, take something like caffeine. Some people are incredibly robust with their sleep regarding caffeine. Other people are incredibly sensitive to it. So although we know caffeine in general disrupts sleep, we really have no idea when you meet someone in the room whether that's a factor. So then you have to think about with them and individualize the formulation. But I think what's helpful about Spielman's model is it helps people realize that it's the perpetuating factors that you can change, and they've got a lot of control over those. So that's probably the one I'd recommend.
Grand. And forgive my pronunciation, I think it's Shona. How do you manage the thought that you need to catch up on sleep? So this kind of cognition that appears, I guess, when we're worrying about sleep. I need to catch up.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because that sleep is one of those things where you watch the Matthew Walker presentation and it talks about, my God, if you don't sleep, you're going to die from all sorts of physical health problems, and it's the most important thing in the world. Perversely, that interrupts sleep because we're also worried about not being able to sleep. And Kirsty Anderson at the Regional Sleep Service said they got a whole host of referrals for sleep problems in response to Matthew Walker's book coming out. So I think the answer to that is, if you're not sleeping one night, just remember that what you're doing is you're building up your sleep urge for the following night. So if you're not sleeping well 1 or 2 nights, what you're doing is you're building up a bank of when you are going to sleep. So it's going to be helpful for your long-term sleep anyway. Because that's one of the things that really governs sleep, a bit like appetite. The longer you go without eating, the hungrier you get. And over time, eventually, your appetite will go up and you will eat. And sleep is like that. So if you have some disrupted sleep, you are banking time between good sleeps in order to give you more effective sleep at some point.
That's really helpful, Tom. Thank you. And Kay has said, thank you very much for an interesting and thought-provoking talk. What are your thoughts on granny naps? Sometimes happen at weekends.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know the answer to this one. So yeah, napping is not recommended. I think it's one of those things, again, it's very individualized. If you can get away with it, that's fine. But generally, you want to keep the same sleep routine at weekends that you do during the week. That's one of the reasons why our sleep is disrupted, is that we have a different routine at weekends than we do during the week. But actually, if you want your sleep to be very consistent, stick to the same routine at weekends that you do during the week. And yes, generally as a default, we say no napping. Again, with that caveat that everyone's individual and you might be able to get away with it, and that's fine if you can. But if you're starting to notice that your sleep's fragmented at night, yeah, one of the first things to do would be to cut out the napping.
Okay. So we're coming to the last few moments of the webcast. So I don't know if you've got any closing comments, Tom, before we bring the webcast to a close.
I think only to say that a bit like someone who asked that question earlier about what if you're worried about your sleep. I think one of the things I like about the Spielman model is that sleep naturally gets disrupted during times of stress. So it would be very expected for us all to have some sleep disruption, and it has a natural recovery rate without us doing anything about it at all. So, you know, we're in very strange times at the moment. It's expected that our sleep will be disrupted to some degree. And you only have to start intervening if that goes on for a long time or starts to interfere with your functioning. And hopefully we've given you some tips to start doing that today.
Wonderful. So I guess it comes to me to just say thank you. I can see the thank yous are arriving in their hundreds on the chat function. A lot of appreciation from across the trust. So, but I guess on behalf of the CSPT team, the webinar team, we'd like to thank you again, Tom, for giving us the benefit of your knowledge and experience. So I wonder if I could just make a plug for the next webcast. Tom, if you could give me control. Yeah. Thank you.
I will try to do that, Kevin.
So just to say that 22nd of May, Kevin Hawkes is going to give us a talk on relationships and sustaining connections. And we've got some interesting stuff coming from Steve Jeffries and Stephen Barton and you can see the dates on your screen there. So thank you again, Tom, and thank you all for joining us, and stay well and keep safe, and we'll see you on the other side.